Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome back to whichever pink and channel this happens to find you on. Connor Southwell, joined by Paddy, Davitt, to preview Norwich City's clash against Manchester City. Of course, tomorrow at Carrow Road, 5:30 p.m. kickoff. Don't let that throw you out. Of course, that's for television purposes. Pad, how are you doing? First of all, it's been an intense week of Norwich City action after obviously what was a fortnight of nothingness in terms of games. How do you assess where Norwich City find themselves heading into what is a very, very difficult couple of games against, obviously starting with Manchester City, but then next week against Liverpool as well?
Yeah, no, that is, well, it doesn't get any harder than that, those two. Just going back, it's been a bit of a maelstrom. I don't know, you kind of get a bit sort of after a break in the games, we need a bit of time to power back up again. I mean, I was expecting Dean Smith to appear at 9 a.m. this morning, and it was actually a 9:30 presser. So that tells you how on the ball we were at our end. But anyway, we got there, and he, more importantly, sounded quite chipper. And as he said, we'll get into it in depth, but balling it down, massive challenge. But it's also an opportunity. You know, as he said, most players he's ever worked with in the game, they want to prove themselves against the best and say, I belong on the same pitch as fill in the blanks, and that's very much the mindset inside the camp. You got the sense from Dean earlier today, and there'll be no rolling over, that's for sure. But that said, for all the reasons we already know, we don't need to be told, Man City and Liverpool, well, they're certainly the two best currently in England, and it may prove that they're as good as any in Europe and beyond, really. So in the weeks and months ahead, both in the latter stages of the Champions League, tremendous galaxy of talent, and Man City is the first one. But, and I'm sure we'll get into it, of course, we all know what happened last time Man City appeared in Norfolk, and never to be forgotten. And I don't know, is it too greedy to hope for more of the same? I don't know. We'll find out in just over 24 hours' time. But that's all you need to focus on, really. If you're anything to do with Norwich, it's happened before, and not that long ago. Certainly the last time that the clubs met in the Premier League at Carrow Road, these things can happen. And, but in order for that to happen again, then as Dean Smith rightly said, he needs 10 or 11 of his players hitting 8, 9s out of 10 individually and collectively. If they don't, then we all know Man City have the quality and abundance to punish them.
Yes, indeed. I guess it's a question of whether lightning can strike twice, isn't it? It was a very depleted squad that day. Ibrahim Hamadou was at centre back alongside Ben Godfrey, I think it was, wasn't there? And there was some concerns about whether Godfrey was fully fit. So, that was an unbelievable game of football. Norwich were tremendous that day. They'll need that and then some, given that Pep Guardiola has spoken in recent weeks and said that he believes this is the best squad he's had at Manchester City. So that would imply that there's probably an improvement needed on what we saw even back in September 2019 it was. So, it would be incredible. But before we actually get into kind of the various strands and threads of Dean Smith's press conference, what did you make of his message and his approach to it? I guess maybe obviously it's naturally going to get compared with how Daniel Farke spoke at the start of the season about these games, because there was so much focus and maybe criticism as well on what many people saw as quite a defeatist attitude to games against the big teams. I remember him regularly talking about how I'm trying to remember exact quotes, but they were along the lines of Norwich City struggling to compete, really. And whilst they're not season-defining games, I think a lot of fans look at these games where they at least want to see a performance. I think back to the Manchester United game under Dean Smith, where Norwich City put in a very, very good performance, lost the game 1-0, but I think most people left Carrow Road quite happy. So what did you make of his overall approach? Do you think he struck the right tone in terms of some of the messages that he was trying to get out there, not just necessarily to his own players, but to fans as well, who will be arriving at Carrow Road tomorrow, hoping, praying that we see a repeat of what we saw back in 2019?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think since he's walked through the door, and obviously now the next challenge is probably the ultimate challenge, but even the Man United game, and Tottenham, Arsenal, all those games, no utterance really in his pre-match to any of those games to suggest we're looking to be on the same sort of pitch, and you can't hope for any more, really, which was towards the end, certainly with Daniel, that was always the kind of the overriding sound you heard, really. And I'm sure he wouldn't have gone into those games. I mean, ultimately, we're talking already liberally about September 2019. He was the head coach. You got the better of Pep Guardiola. So, but certainly at this stage of Dean Smith's Norwich career, we're not hearing anything other than, it's an opportunity to relish and embrace, and also going into it on the back of, tinged with disappointment midweek that they couldn't go on when they got the first goal and beat Crystal Palace, but still, unbeaten in the last 3 in the Premier League, through to the next round of the FA Cup. They're bigger players now back and available, maybe bar Tim Krul, you would argue, but there's no need really, given there is a bit of momentum there is a bit of self-belief and a bit of confidence that within this City camp they should be cowed by the challenge ahead. Just embrace it. I mean, ultimately, even the most ardent Norwich fan doesn't really, I think, expect, although I did just put a quote up there from Craig Brooks, who suggested it might be 4-0 Norwich. If it is, you've heard it here first. I don't think it will be 4-0 Norwich, but even the most ardent, joking aside, really expects Norwich to go to Carrow tomorrow and beat Man City. I don't think that's the case. What they will do, to echo your point, Connor, is expect them to compete and not to be fearful. Respect, but not fear. Dean Smith said those very words this morning, and I think that's how his players will go out there and approach it. There certainly won't be any trace, I think, of, my mind immediately goes back to that. Well, I mean, you could go back to the Liverpool and the Man City games earlier this season, but the big one was the Chelsea one, where they were wasn't just one white flag. There was white flags everywhere getting raised on the pitch at Stamford Bridge. They were an embarrassment that day, really. And I don't think we'll be accusing a Dean Smith Norwich of anything of that nature tomorrow, even if ultimately Man City's quality proves the difference. So, yeah, I expect it to be very competitive, and maybe, as much as we're looking at it from the Norwich aspect, about they really need to extract almost their top performances individually. Man City might be looking at it, and there might be, as there was probably in September 19, not that they'd ever publicly admit it, a little bit of, not quite the razor sharp focus they would approach maybe a game against the team higher up in the league. And if there isn't, you'd stop short calling it complacency, but if there isn't just a subconscious element that the Man City players don't feel they need to produce their top draw performances, and then Norwich meet them with one of their better performances, then I think we can guarantee if that happens, it will be competitive. Whether it's enough for the result, then of course, that comes down to Norwich's quality and maybe a little bit of luck on the day. But no, I don't think this is a game anybody connected to Norwich needs to go with a fearful approach. I think this is one to really relish. Norwich now are in a really good vein of form and look like a Premier League outfit. And okay, the damage may already be done in terms of the wider picture in staying up this season, but now they look like they can compete and cause teams problems. And okay, it's not the vintage Manchester United team of yesteryear, but they were very fortunate to escape with a win at Carrow before Christmas. And they have very good individual players, as Man City do. So no, I'm actually talking myself into quite looking forward to this game now, Connor.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting, isn't it? Because you mentioned the Arsenal game. That was obviously, there's a whole load of context to add to that, and I think Norwich and Dean Smith have shown in the last month or so that actually those results need to be taken with the context that he applied at the time. In fairness, which maybe some people were wondering whether or not they were just excuses at that point. It does look like he has been proven right, given the uplifting performances that we've seen since those players have returned. Obviously, the back-to-back wins against Watford and Everton helped, but also the draw against Crystal Palace, which maybe, whilst the performance level wasn't as high as maybe it was in the last two games, they still ultimately emerged with a result. But you look at the top teams that they've played, and again, some people won't want to put Manchester United and Spurs into that category as the elite of the elite, but they're certainly deemed as part of that so-called Big Six. They're viewed as big players in the Premier League, and rightly so. Norwich City lost 3-0 at Spurs, although we were both at the game. Didn't necessarily feel that was a fair reflection on how the game actually unfolded. And then the Manchester United game, which Dean Smith and Norwich fans were probably disappointed that they left, let alone 1 point. Some probably felt they deserved 3 based on their performance. So those two games, in terms of maybe setting the tone of how a Dean Smith team and a Dean Smith Norwich City team plays against one of those elite teams, shows maybe the positive signs that hopefully tomorrow there will be a competitive element, even if ultimately that does end in defeat.
Yeah, and what I'd also throw into this mix as well, and I put it to Dean earlier, is his recent record when he was Villa manager against Man City. Okay, it was 3 defeats, but in all of those games, they did run Man City very close. There was a League Cup final meeting that Villa, maybe you could argue did enough to win the game. They were very good that day, but they got beat by the odd goal in 3, I think. From memory, it was a similar scoreline at Villa Park in the last league meeting I think he was in charge of. And even that season, so it's season before this one, that they went to Man City and got beat 2-0, but I think Man City's opening goal didn't come to the 79th minute that day. I checked all that this morning before we spoke to him, and that to me underlines that there's a coach who maybe hasn't detected weaknesses, because I'm not sure there are too many weaknesses with Guardiola as a coach, or certainly the players at his disposal, but certainly elements of their game that he felt with the group of players he had with Villa that he could exploit. And if that's the case, why couldn't he take some of those and put those into the mix for this weekend with his Norwich players? As he said, you can't, without wanting, he didn't really want to ultimately map out his entire strategy, but there's no way Norwich can essentially park 2 or 3 buses for 90 minutes and expect Man City with their quality not to find a way through. So Norwich going to have to be able to offer something with the ball, but also he did actually say, it's just come back to me, that you can actually exert control in a game when you don't have the ball by kind of channeling the ball into areas of the pitch where you're comfortable, and he feels they've done that pretty well in recent games. And if you look at the big chances that they've coughed up in all of these games in this recent run, it's nowhere near what it was maybe pre-Dean's arrival, when they were too easy to penetrate and too easy to sort of get shots away on Tim Krul's goal. So, yes, everything that's gone before needs to be better than it's ever been under Dean Smith to subdue Manchester City's attacking array. But, I think there's a coach there who, with Shakespeare alongside him, maybe feels there's elements that they can get a little bit of joy, and they'll need to, because, ultimately, I don't think there's much down for them if it's kind of we're going to just basically park the bus and you can have 75, 80% of possession. It might turn out they have that amount of possession because they're so good on the ball, but, not in many ways, dissimilar to how Wednesday panned out. They got that early goal, but then the possession stats would tell you Palace had a lot of the ball and didn't really, prior to Zaha checking in onto his right and banging one in from 20-odd yards. Brilliant finish. But it wasn't really Norwich getting cut open, you could argue. And thereafter, they didn't really get cut open. I think Angus Gunn probably had 1 or 2 saves to make on the night. And yes, okay, Man City's quality individually is far superior than Palace's. But that did, again, for me, illustrate that without the ball, there is a collective discipline, and they understand their jobs. And it's not just about the back four, even the midfield and the way that Pukki and Ida and Rashica were tracking back. And of course, as we'll get into shortly, I'm sure, the big bonus is Josh Sargent is back tomorrow. And in a type of game where Norwich inevitably will be tested without the ball and need to be very good defensively against the ball, I think having him back into the mix, given his work rate and his desire and his appetite, to do that side of the game, I think that's a big plus.
Yeah, it is. And we'll come back to Sargent and systems in just a moment, but not to scare anyone. Even if you can do that with this Manchester City side, which is just so it was such a well-oiled machine. Only 2 defeats all season. They've not lost a game since a 2-0 home defeat to Crystal Palace at the back end of October. Their other defeat came on the opening day against Spurs. They're so much talent in their ranks. It's untrue. They've got a 9-point lead at the top of the Premier League. It's looking likely that
now, Connor, just stop it.
It's looking like the title is going to be returning to the Etihad Stadium again. But if you want a crumb of comfort, the last game in the 2 games ago in the Premier League was a 1-1 draw against Southampton at St Mary's. So maybe that is a blueprint that Dean Smith can utilise heading into this game. But you've mentioned Josh Sargent. He's obviously returning from illness. Dean Smith wouldn't confirm whether or not that was COVID, but he has returned from an illness of some sort. Ozan Kabak doesn't make it. Andrew Mbamidele's had a little bit of a setback. He's returning to revisit his consultant, which I don't think sounds like particularly good news. I didn't particularly get the impression that Lucas Rupp would be an option for this game either. Matthias Norman doesn't look like he's going to be fit enough to start. So which direction does Dean Smith head back into? Can he go back to that 4-3-3 with Sargent on the right? Because it seemed like, even though he eventually did put Adam Eder on the right on Wednesday, and maybe he kind of admitted it today, he didn't necessarily want him to go to that right-hand side. And he kind of got that sense when him, Craig Shakespeare and Liam Bramley were having that long discussion just before Zaha rifled the ball into the top corner, when it felt like a change was on the card to some extent. So what direction do you see him heading in terms of formation and systems?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the point that David on Facebook's just asked us as well. I mean, for me, he was very clear after the Watford win when it was put to him, you had these type of opponents on the horizon, and he essentially said, and he reiterated it again earlier today, going with the 4-4-2 has essentially left them undermanned in the middle of the park, but has given them maybe more of an attacking threat because you've got, 2/3 options further up the pitch. But he did say after Watford that, really you can't go that way. It's one thing to maybe give Palace or Watford a man advantage in the middle of the park, quite another to give Man City principally, but also Liverpool, but because of the nature of how Man City play and construct the game, to essentially give them a numerical advantage in the centre of the park is not a recipe that's going to end well. So would fully expect it might nominally look like a 4-3-3 in terms of when the team news drops and now before kick-off on the formation graphic. But if that's Rashica on one side and Sargent on the other, I think it will swiftly become a 5 and they'll just drop in alongside. For me, as you rightly said, he didn't really sound overly confident that Norman will be starting the game unless it's a double bluff. So if he's out of the equation, then from a starting point of view, then it's Gilmour, Lees, Malou and McLean, I think, in the middle of the park. And you would hope, going back to what we said earlier, that the smaller sample of possession that Norwich can get, that it's Gilmour who's able to get on the ball, because he would you would hope, exert a degree of control. He did play in that game at Man City, and it was very much, he was stuck on the carousel. Lees Malou played as well, didn't he? I'm going to say McLean, but I'll have to double check that. And that day, it was just the right to left getting shoveled across the pitch, and then they got a lot of join wide areas, and of course, infamously, Yanulis was hooked at half-time, having not been able to deal with Gabriel Jesus. So, you can imagine Pep wanting to try something similar. I think he'll find it a lot harder to get the upper hand against Brandon Williams, who certainly won't lack for any extra motivation, given he's a United player playing against City. So there'll be a bigger thing in play for him. But with him and Aarons, and you'd expect Hanley and Gibson, then I think there's a sturdy barrier there. And yeah, for me, 4-3-3 maybe on the team sheet, but given you expect Man City to dominate the ball a lot, I think that would swiftly become a Sargent and a Rashica bolstering a 3 across the middle of the park. And then it's, can you, when you do get the ball, can you break quickly? Can you get in and around? For me, Pukki. But, I wouldn't be massively surprised if he went Eder as the central one in a 3, because maybe he feels that in the type of game it's going to be, he would value what Eder can bring, maybe with his back to goal, but didn't really get the sense we saw enough from him either against Wolves in the FA Cup or Palace midweek to suggest that you start him ahead of Pukki. So could be very, very wrong, very wrong. But I think everything that Dean Smith has said post Watford leads you to think he's probably going to go that route, and it'll be one out-and-out striker. He'll probably match him up in terms of numbers and then supplement that with a Sargent and with a Rashica, I think.
Yeah, the most telling one for me in terms of that centre forward decision was when he moved Eder to the right and not Pukki to the right in midweek. It felt like if it was going to be Eder, then maybe he would have pushed Pukki out to the right hand side, and he didn't do that. It's going to be a fascinating game anyway, because Manchester City obviously bring quality. They bring a real aura, I think, to Carrow Road as well with Pep Guardiola. I think any Pep Guardiola side has a degree of aura, but that shift in mentality is going to be key. I mean, you asked him a pretty good question about psychology and whether these games are about psychology and belief more than they are maybe about tactical battles and stuff that goes on the pitch, because we could sit here all day and deconstruct all the brilliant things that Manchester City do. Ultimately, it may be what's between the ears that help Norwich City compete, and those kind of those elements that you need to actually scrap and be willing to fight and willing to put your foot and your head in where it hurts. If Norwich City are willing to do those elements, and we've seen that in the last 2 games where they've been forced to defend for long periods and control games at times without the ball, particularly against Wolves, where they did that very well. If they can do that and prevent the chances that Manchester City get on their goal, then who knows? Maybe it will set up as one of those days, and lightning will strike twice, and we'll be talking about it in those terms. But more widely on kind of the psychology point and the mentality point, it was interesting what Dean Smith said about the growth that he thinks he's seen within the group, and maybe the change in the manner of their meetings, which was quite interesting. Just talk to us a little bit about that, Pad, and exactly what he said.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I think his inference was that when him and Shakespeare got there, that it was a very quiet group. That maybe they were less willing to voice their opinions. Certainly, to maybe take issue with things that they were being told or imparted by the coaching team, the previous coaches, and he's clearly wanted to change that. And part of that was, of course, the recent admission or announcement that he wanted that leadership group, an actual fully fledged body representing the players, voted for by the players, that would almost be a conduit to him as well. And that's all part of the same process. He wants that two-way communication. It's not a case of Smith and Shakespeare essentially dictating how things are. Of course, ultimately, they set the parameters within which everything that they're trying to achieve this season will be aimed for. But within that, you need to empower these players, clearly. And this all flows a little bit into what we discussed, myself and you, Connor, on the Monday Night Club earlier this week on the Pink and App about, his man management, the human element to how he interacts with people. It's not just about him and his coaching ability, supplemented with Shakespeare and all the other coaches, Liam Bramley now, of course. It's how you treat people and how because ultimately, when the whistle goes tomorrow, it's going to be those at Grant Hanley and the other 10 who are needing to go out and do the business. They can't be looking to Dean Smith for guidance or instruction, not in the midst of the action anyway. So, yeah, it sounds like, and knowing as we do, albeit from a distance, the characters that are in that dressing room, I was a little bit surprised to hear that but maybe the previous regime were not keen to. Daniel always remember one of his phrases was, "Yeah, we've had a discussion. They listened and I spoke," basically.
Which isn't a discussion, is it?
Not really, no.
That's a lecture.
Not in the collegiate sense of the discussion, no, like me and you are having now. But when you look at the characters, and you see a Kenny McLean, for example, you wouldn't think he'd be a shrinking violet, if he was asked to express an opinion, or Hanley himself, behind closed doors. Tim Krul, I'm sure, is very vocal. Those experienced players, I'm sure, haven't needed much encouragement, but it does sound like that Dean Smith is now, because as he said, again today, he said it a few times, unless the players tell him and Shakespeare, then they don't know. They can't assume that they know the tactical things they're trying to impart or whatever it is, the instructions, the guidance. They can't assume they already know it. They need to hear it from the players themselves, because this isn't the group of players that Dean Smith started the season with. And that was an interesting point. He was asked earlier today as well, does it now feel like his squad as opposed to the squad he inherited from Daniel? And probably in a similar vein, he said, more or less that, these players now have worked with him long enough. They know his methods, I'm sure. They know the demands he's placing on them. And they can also see the results of what he's asking them to do. So it's a lot easier to get buy-in when you're talking to players or standing up at Colney when you've won 4 in 5, as it was before Palace. And they can see the real fruits of their labour in terms of what they're doing on the training pitch at Colney. So, yeah, and they'll need that. They'll need that personality individually and collectively for the rest of the season, but they'll certainly need it tomorrow, because it takes somebody quite special really to, in a footballing sense, go up against some of, no doubt about it, some of the best players in the world. I mean, it was, as you were just asking me this last question, I thought I'd sort of stumble on what their actual lineup was against Brentford in midweek. They won the game 2-0. I didn't really see the highlights, so I don't know how the game panned out. But the names are ridiculous: Kevin De Bruyne, Bernardo Silva, Phil Foden, Sterling, Mahrez. I mean, if we played a game of guess the combined transfer fee, you're talking maybe upwards of, I don't know, or certainly up north of 500 million, I would imagine. So that's who is on the pitch with these Norwich players tomorrow. But if you're a Norwich player, you've got to park that. You've got to park the who's wearing the shirt. And as Dean rightly said today, it's 11 human beings against 11 human beings. They're human. They are fallible. They make mistakes. And Dean Smith needs to set Norwich up in a way that can maybe exploit some of those mistakes. And as I said, really that takes us back to what we said at the start. I don't think they fear the challenge. They see it as an opportunity. And with characters like McLean, you would expect on the park tomorrow, and Hanley and Ben Gibson, I didn't mention him earlier, they should be able to galvanise the players around them. That, as that crop did in September 2019, they get a result of that scale again tomorrow, it reverberates around the world, and those players get put onto a completely different pedestal. And what an opportunity in front of them tomorrow.
Yeah, there's that element, but there's of course the momentum element as well. It would be a fourth game unbeaten in the Premier League. Obviously, is it fourth? Yeah, fifth in all competitions. If of course you include that FA Cup game as well, it would be massive. A couple of things to end with. Manchester City have lost just once of their last 36 Premier League games against sides who have started the day in the relegation zone. They've won 30 of those. That loss arrived against Norwich in 2019, and they're unbeaten in their last 11 away games as well. So maybe there's an along-come Norwich element to both of those statistics, we hope, if we're going to end on a positive note.
Well, yeah, is that positive though, Connor?
Well, I'm trying to make it positive, but I don't think it really is positive, to be completely honest.
I mean, ultimately, we've spent thick end of 30 minutes now suggesting that Norwich can repeat what they did in September 2019. But as I just said, that result reverberated around the world because it was so unique, so unexpected, so magnificently memorable for anybody who was fortunate to be there, or even has watched it from afar. To be in any way, shape, or form connected with Norwich that day, I would struggle to think there's any one moment that's probably topped the final whistle there when that result was confirmed in recent times. Anyway, obviously we've had the Championship success and Premier League promotions, but as a moment, as a game, that is at the pinnacle, and it is that for all the reasons we've discussed today. So to expect Norwich to scale that mountain again, it's very hard to sort of sit here, particularly as you rightly say. I think this is a better Man City collective than 2 seasons ago. If you look at their dominance of the league this season, it's frightening. I mean, Dean Smith talking about Grealish today. He was asked about Grealish, their relationship from Aston Villa. £100 million, British record transfer. He comes on off the bench midweek because they've got players ahead of him. He's not really, you wouldn't say, stamped his authority on that Manchester City 11 yet. And that is the scale of squad depth they've got, that is the case. So, ultimately, I think I wouldn't even put percentages on it. We all know it's very, very, very unlikely that Norwich get a result tomorrow, but there is a chance, and that's what we all have to cling to. And it'll be just great to see it. I mean, this is what it's about, isn't it? This is about Norwich in the Premier League. It's to have Pep Guardiola at Carrow Road, Kevin De Bruyne, Phil Foden, et al. That's what all the hard yards in the Championship are about. So why not embrace it and enjoy it on and off the park?
Absolutely. That rounds us off nicely as a rallying cry before tomorrow, maybe. We're going to be doing team news videos slightly differently on all our channels this week. So we're going to be going live at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, of course, 5:30 kickoff. Me and you, Pad, we're going to be at the Fat Cat and Canary pub. So if people want to come down and join us and or ask questions or even be involved.
Don't hurl any abuse, though, because we're quite wallflowers in terms of it's all right. I mean, you talking to each. Look, this is just like we're having a conversation in our respective bedrooms, but in an actual live setting, we could go into our shells if we get any abuse. So no abuse, please.
Yeah, and I'm guessing people are going to be armed with bottles as well. So hopefully it doesn't
Yeah.
go that bad. But there's also an opportunity at the moment if you subscribe to our new Pink and Plus app before kickoff tomorrow that you'll be entered into a draw to win a signed Josh Sargent shirt. And who doesn't want one of those at the moment? So that is well worth doing it. You can see all the details going across the bottom of the screen now. A 1 month free trial, £1.99 a month thereafter to unlock plenty of exclusive Norwich City content. More details at Pinken.com. I think that's all the admin done. Pad, thank you very much. We'll see you all tomorrow at the Fat Cat and Canary. Let's hope lightning does strike twice. Enjoy the rest of your Friday.